fast discussion pointed and directed towards the SME community on how we're going to reopen our economy and our businesses over the next number of months. I'm going to introduce our guests in a moment, and Minister Troy will then spend a few minutes to talk us through what the Department of Enterprise's plan for reopening. And then I'll go through some questions for the panelists before throwing the floor open to you, the guests. So just some quick housekeeping. This is a recorded event, and the recording will be linked on our website afterwards. And also there are journalists online. So you are on the record. This isn't a Chatham House discussion, and just to be aware of that. Nothing scary, but just you may be reported on what you say today. Delighted that we're joined by our panelists this morning, Minister of State Robert Troy from the Department of Enterprise, next door to us, Professor Luke O'Neill, whom you all know from Trinity College, and representing our typical type of hospitality business, we're delighted to welcome Managing Director of Ailwee Caves, Nuala Mulqueeny. I'm going to please ensure that your mic is off until we start the Q&As. This is a 60-minute event, in and out. So please, if you're called to ask a question, or you put a question through, or anyone that comes on live, no monologues, please. This will be short and snappy and over in 1 hour. That's it from me. I'm going to ask Minister of State Troy to just introduce the topic for us and just very briefly describe how we're going to get back to business.
Okay, thanks very much, Neil. Thanks for the invitation to participate today. Delighted to be on the panel, and just compliment ISME for the strong advocacy work they've been doing on behalf of the SME sector and for their constructive engagement with me over the last number of months. I don't think any member that's on the forum today needs me to tell them how difficult the last 12 months have been. And I'm not in any way making this a comparable, but as in a past life, and a publican who's quite often many weeks the takings didn't meet the outgoings, I can somewhat understand the pressures that you have faced over the last 12 months. And that's why on entering government, I was determined to ensure that we had enhanced measures of support for our SME sector to help them deal with the enforced restrictions over the last 12 months. And you're aware of them: the ReStart Plus, the CRIS, the EWIS, the rates waiver, small business aid scheme, etc. And just to say that I very much operate an open door policy. If any of your members have an issue, have a difficulty accessing the supports, please feel to reach out. But in saying that, I'm very conscious that all the members who are on here today, while they welcome the supports, as entrepreneurs, as business people, they're motivated by the challenge of creating jobs, creating opportunities, and creating their own wealth. And what they really want to see is how they can get back to doing what they do best, and that's running their business. And I think we have made real progress. We've made huge progress since January of this year. The vaccination rollout has been accelerated, and it is making a huge difference. And the only impediment to the delivery of the vaccination since the start of the year, or to the administration of the vaccination, has been the delivery to our shores. It's working so well, but I leave that to Professor Luke O'Neill to cover, because he's the expert in that field. And dare I say, we know him more from TV3 and News Talk than we do from Trinity, but I want to compliment him for the work he's doing, because he has never underestimated the severity of the crisis, but has always been calm and reassuring. And so many people take comfort from the work that he's doing. So we appreciate the work that he is doing on the national airwaves, as well as the great work that he's doing in research in Trinity. So we have taken, I suppose, a cautious approach to reopening, and some might say on this call today, and I'm happy to engage, too cautious. But the underlying principle the government has had over the last number of months is we want this to be the last lockdown, and we don't want the really hard-fought gains that we've made from January to be lost for the sake of a week or a fortnight or 3 weeks, because that's the space that we're in. Next Friday, government will publish a new update on the reopening for May and June to give certainty, to give guidance to the businesses, because I'm conscious that's what what is needed. What we are looking at and what's out there already, you won't be surprised. The reinstatement of the click and collect, initially non-essential retail, full reopening of construction, personal services such as hairdressers and barbers. And when you look at me today, I can't wait till that happens. Religious services, and then into the end of May, into June, the hospitality sector. So that's how it looks at the moment. And we will bring certainty in relation to that this day week. We also want to, or I want to share with you that government intends to publish the National Economic Recovery Plan. The date of the exact publication has yet to be finalised, but we're looking at mid to end of May, maybe the second or third week in May. What's that about? It's about how we can stimulate the domestic economy. It'll give certainty in relation to the supports that are currently in place, and I want to reassure your members there will be no sudden cliff edge at the end of June. There will be a tapering, and there will be enhanced supports for sectors that have been most adversely affected by this pandemic. Two other points I want to touch on. The summary rescue package. And I want to compliment ISME for the work that they've done in relation to this. They really have been strong advocates in relation to this, and that is bringing forward an administrative restructuring process. So small and micro businesses will have the opportunity to avail of an administrative restructuring, something that will be timely, cost effective, and not known, but it is my intention to bring the heads of bill to government the week after next, hopefully get approval from government the week after next, with the view to having it enacted before the summer recess. It is an ambitious target, but it is a target I'm determined to meet because I'm very conscious that it is critical to small businesses to reopen, for viable businesses to have the option to restructure. That's the timelines there. Another big issue in relation to businesses, and it was an issue before COVID, and it'll be an issue, hopefully it won't be an issue after COVID because we're dealing with it, and that is the high cost of insurance. You're aware the judicial guidelines come into effect tomorrow, and we also have proposals in relation to the reform of PIAB, again, something that ISME has fed into, and it's my proposals that PIAB will be enacted, the reforms, in the autumn of this year, because just competing demands of time of getting legislation through the door, and we've prioritised the summary rescue package from this department's perspective. We're also working on the SME task force, and ISME have sat on that. We have a number of objectives that we want to implement, and an implementation group has been established, and we're working on that. And I think some of the flavour of the questions that Neil shared with me that maybe raised today was in the area of access to credit. And I very much welcome an opportunity to hear your members' views in relation to access to credit, because despite government introducing the credit guarantee scheme of 2 billion last summer, I have a worry about the uptake and the drawdown in that, and how efficiently that's working. And I do believe we need to be looking at alternative. Regional enterprise plans, there's 9 regions across the country. We've commenced the regional enterprise plans. That is each region having the capacity to design their own plan for 2021 to 2024. Work has commenced on that. It'll be underpinned by a specific fund to support the regions, and I'd encourage your members in their own respective region to feed into that. It's bottom up. We want to ensure and listen to the stakeholders on the ground in terms of what their key objectives are, for the next 3 years to support economic development and job creation in the region. So look, that's what I'll say from the offset. Delighted to be on today and happy to engage I may not have all the answers. If I don't, I'll come back to you, and I certainly will answer what I do know as honestly and truthfully as I can.
Well, many thanks, Minister, and perhaps while you're there and you have the mic unmuted, and I'm conscious that we do have a great number of hospitality businesses, including our SME MD today, Nuala McQueenie. I know we are going to be talking about some relative degree of relaxation in hospitality starting in May, but it is unlikely that we're going to be up to a significant level of hospitality commercial activity very quickly. So what are government plans on tapering COVID supports? When are we likely to see both the wage supports and the direct business supports? Obviously, the state can't commit to those indefinitely. Could you give us some idea of what the length of the runway looks like for those?
Well, as I said, we had given certainty right up until the end of June in relation to e-ways, pub, Chris, the warehousing of tax, the VAT reduction, and it is our intention that there will be no sudden cliff edge fall off. And as part of the summer economic recovery plan in mid-May, we will give clear guidance in terms of what is coming for July, August, and subsequently. So I can't answer that today, but only to reassure there will be no sudden cliff edge. So people and businesses who are dependent on supports, they will be tapered off as we reopen the economy. That's only natural and to be expected. And as we taper off the supports that are there currently, we will have this new summary rescue package up and running. The process will be there so that viable businesses will be able to restructure and to start trading normally again. And that's why we've placed such an emphasis on the timeline of the summary rescue, because conscious that the supports will be tapering off, we will need to have a mechanism in place to facilitate businesses to restructure.
Okay, and acknowledging how, especially from an employee point of view, the EWSS and the PUP, the PUP payment are so important. We have unfortunately we have some businesses that have complained to us that in their trying to prepare for a gradual reopening in May and June, they have asked people to return to work, but not on a full-time basis, and they're encountering difficulties with staff who are getting the full PUP payment and are reluctant to come to work or to return to work unless they're getting a full 39, 40-hour week. So in other words, in some ways, the PUP payment is becoming a disincentive for some people to work at the moment. Can you say how the government might deal with that over the next number of months if that proves to be an obstacle?
Well, from my perspective, social welfare is there as a safety net. It shouldn't be as, be more beneficial to be on social welfare than to be working. And there is a system there within the social welfare historically before the PUP payment came in, where people could work a certain number of days and claim a social welfare benefit for the days that they're off. That may need to be reviewed in the context of coming out of this, but these are all things that are going to be reviewed in the context of the economic summer statement and what way we're going to extend the schemes that are in place until the end of June out over and above the end of June. What I would say is most people who are on PUP payments, Neil, are people who would rather be working, are people who are chomping at the bit, certainly from my own experience in dealing at a constituency level with people day in, day out. They just want to get back to work. When you speak to whether it's the LVA or the Vintners Association, what they're more concerned about now is the mental health of their employees who have been out of work for 12 months and who want to get back to work. So we want to get people back to work, and we don't want to have a situation where it's more beneficial for someone to be on a PUP payment or social welfare. There is mechanisms there where you can work part-time and claim part-time. We don't want to have a situation where somebody is going to be more financially advantageous to be off work full time, and that's something that we'll review.
Thanks very much, Minister. If I could welcome in Professor Luke O'Neill into the discussion next. I'll because I don't like letting people relax, I'm going to bounce around and not tell people who I'm going to question next. Firstly, thanks, Luke, for joining us. I know you've just come off a very long call earlier on this morning. I'm conscious that we're dealing with news yesterday of a large workplace outbreak, and I don't want to talk about the company or anything like that, but I would like you, if possible, to comment and just on, say, the thought processes of your medical colleagues in NPHET on the whole issue, which we've been very frustrated about, the lack of progress on workplace antigen testing. And despite what looks to us like a preponderance of scientific heft behind it, the CDC in the United States, the WHO guidance and approval, the EU Commission's common list of 20 good tests, there just appears to us, from where we're sitting as laypersons on the sideline, there just appears to be a hostility in NPHET to, you know, we've talked to the politicians about this as well, about why it isn't happening. And even in public, we hear this hostility to rapid antigen testing rollout. Could you give a view on why you think that is?
It's a mystery to me as well, Neil. I mean, I've been banging on about this with Pat Kenny for the past 4 or 5 months, remember. Now, to give the government credit, they got Mark Ferguson in with a great report on antigen testing, a very effective, comprehensive report. The recommendations are there. Let's implement that report, you see. And I would also say that, and I've just come off a 4-hour call, which people might be intrigued by. It was a big COVID-19 vaccine call by the Israelis. The UK scientists in Oxford were on it, the Germans. So it was a big sort of round table type thing. Israel is best practice by far, remember. They're using antigen testing as a key weapon against this virus. We've seen the UK, of course, now sending to houses 10 antigen tests, you see. So in other words, we have to hopefully begin to implement antigen testing. It's another weapon. I guess one fear NPHET have had, which is not unreasonable, is it may let people let their guards down in some way and we become less stringent. We think this is a really foolproof thing to do. But I think we should trust employers. Many employers want antigen testing, don't they? And some have it already, by the way. It's not as if it's completely unknown. The hauliers were the first to implement it in Europe, remember, and it worked great for them. So I think it's just a question of deployment now in many ways.
Okay, and so that's in the context of preventive care in the workplace. We have a HR dial-in service here for a lot of members, and I have to say, for the last number of weeks, which is obviously very unusual and very specific to where we are, but the calls are around vaccination in the workplace, the status of those who have for religious or medical reasons a fear of taking a vaccine. But if I could pose a general question to you about how you think, and as someone who works in a public workplace yourself, how in this interim rollout period you think we're going to handle workplaces where there are vaccinated workers and unvaccinated workers working together?
It's a really difficult one, Neil, to be. You can't force people to take a vaccine. That's completely unacceptable. That will be the general view of any vaccination campaign. It has to be voluntary. That's the first thing. Now, and there's all kinds of reasons. Some are anxious, and it's very difficult. You've got to cajole them and try to win them over. It's their decision not to be vaccinated, you see, is the way to think of it. Now, of course, from my side, I would encourage everybody to get the vaccine for all kinds of reasons. I mean, first of all, to protect them against this really dangerous virus. That's number one. Secondly, it will protect their community because these vaccines are stopping transmission. The evidence now is absolutely compelling. 80% decrease in transmission if you're vaccinated. So you will not infect someone who's vulnerable. Let's say you meet someone in the workplace who can't be vaccinated because they've got cancer, right? You might infect them, remember, and they might then get very severe disease. So you're trying to appeal to people's sense of community is the second approach to this in a way. Now, of course, you will see examples of where an employer goes, I have to vaccinate my staff because I don't want to put my customers at risk, that kind of thing, you know? Now that becomes a contractual matter, doesn't it? And it might be in the contract, so therefore you can't force a vaccine on people, but it's a very difficult thing. I think we have to, I hate to bang on about Israel, I know, it's fresh in my mind because I just spoke to the chief immunologist there. That country is now has escaped the pandemic, and he said it very clearly. Israel has now exited. Isn't that a great phrase? Everything's open there. Now there are restrictions, of course. It's not as if it's wide open. I mean, we will be like them. We will become like Israel. You need to get, the numbers are amazing. Israel, 90% of the over 70s have now had 2 shots in Israel, and 80% of the over 20s. They've met the 80% number already, you see. And then they've got the evidence that this vaccine is working. Now they're using Pfizer, of course, and people would ask, oh, what would we use? But remember, all the vaccines give huge protection against severe disease, and that's the most important thing, because that means less hospitalizations, less ICU admissions, and less death, and that's what we want. We don't make vaccines to stop you getting the sniffles. We make them to stop you getting severe disease, and all the vaccines do that. So as ever, we're banging that drum. Take any vaccine you're offered. It's a suit of armor that will protect you, you see. So again, you can now begin to envisage what the next 4, 6, 8 weeks will be like based on the vaccine rollout. That's the only key driver of all of this, and we all know this in spades, right? And if that gets slowed down by 2 or 3 weeks, my biggest fear at the moment is that Johnson & Johnson would be handled differently. And there was a projection on prime time, which looks accurate to me. If they don't use Johnson & Johnson, you can push things out by 3, 4 weeks, which is very serious for any business, isn't it? I mean, that's far too long a time. So the pressure now is on NIAC, and we're waiting with bated breath. And I wouldn't be criticizing them. It's a difficult task they have. They've got to weigh up lots of different things, and it's not easy, you know. But the hope would be that by the time we get to the end of June, we'll meet the 80% number, and watch, we will be in a really much better place by then. And what that means is then the government can begin to take a few more risks. We can't carry on in this grey zone. It's just outrageous for us all, you know, and we'll have to take some risks. We'll have to accept there will be the odd spike here and there, get ready for those with testing and tracing and isolating, you see. So in other words, the roadmap is crystal clear now, need out of this, because we know so much about the virus. The last thing I'd say is this. We now know how to mitigate against catching this virus, and we all know what it is. Good ventilation indoors, go outdoors as much as you can over the next few months. Try and move everything outdoors if possible. I know it's not possible for everything, but certainly good ventilation indoors, outdoor activities for any business, and wear masks. That's 90% of the mitigation. Strangely, it's not surfaces. There's evidence now they're not really a source of infection. Obviously, in a hospital they might be, because there's lots of risk there, you know. And strangely enough, hand washing may become less of an important thing, because again, there's not much evidence of catching off surfaces. So now we know how to decrease risk with our public health measures, and if we combine that with good testing, which we've just spoken about, and get as many vaccines out as possible, now you can really say, look, by July, August, it's a different story entirely.
Well, thanks very much, Luke, and I will come back to you and the Minister, but I suppose, Nuala, from your point of view as the MD of a hospitality business, can I ask you, and obviously without naming names or anything, but have you had any issues from a vaccination or health and safety point of view as you reopen, or are you not at that stage in your business reopening cycle yet?
Well, to be honest, Neil, we're not actually physically at that stage yet. As the Minister was saying there, you know, he gave us the indication quite clearly that hospitality and our ilk would be roughly more or less the same as last year, you know, mid or late June, you know, but like that, and I have to agree with what the Minister said. All of my 38 staff, some of which are here working at home part-time, thanks to the WSS, full-time, thanks to those sorts of supports as well, they're dying to get back to work. That's what they are dying to do. Do you know what I mean? In whatever shape or form, you know, some can go on short time and the supports are there, but you know, in a rurally based tourism business like we are, a family business for that matter, you know, all our staff are dying to get back to doing what we do best, and that is welcoming people on site. Now, we're in the service industry. It's in our DNA to take care and to educate people. So what Luke was saying, what Dr. Luke was saying there about, you know, maintaining the mitigating factors there with hand washing and mask wearing, we will maintain that, you know, throughout the staff, throughout the team, throughout the visitors when we can open again, you know. But in relation to vaccination and that sort of thing, we have a little bit to go yet. Do you know what I mean? Because as I say, my octogenarian parents have just put down their fortnight of after their second vaccination, so they're chomping at the bit. But hopefully, as the weeks go by, you know, the vaccination rollout will go well. But again, like I say to you, no hesitation to come back to work or anything like that. I haven't felt that, nor did we feel it when we reopened very successfully and ran a very busy summer period of 15 weeks last year. So we're hoping for something similar, and to realize that we do realize the necessity of these mitigating exercises. Do you know what I mean? And we can still enjoy ourselves. We can still educate people about this beautiful Burren region that we're in here, and welcome people with open arms like we do always.
Nuala, just to assist people who wouldn't necessarily have too much exposure to the hospitality or the tourism industry, aside from your 38 jobs on site, roughly how many service businesses and other businesses would you be interacting with commercially in the region?
Look at I look at my when pre-COVID, when I'd be looking to pay the suppliers and that sort of thing, I'd have a list of 200-300 people, you know, and we very much have you know, an ethos of working with local suppliers, you know, be it for our food industry and our crafts and that sort of thing, our ancillary services here on site, you know. You know, there are so many people with a knock-on effect, you know, within the tourism industry. You know, even the families alone that work with us. Do you know what I mean? We've been open here as a family business for over 45 years. There isn't a family in the north of County Clare that one person or many of them haven't worked with us over the years. I remember a guy years ago came to be one of our first guides of the tour, and he was a good guide. And my dad said to him, you know, you're doing well. Don't worry, he said, I have 5 sisters at home, and one by one, as they became, you know, each of the sisters came and worked with us. Do you know what I mean? You know, up until COVID happened, you know, in March 13th, 2020, there's over 6.5, nearly 7,000 people involved in the tourism industry in County Clare alone. Do you know? So it is the backbone of especially rural society. Do you know? And we're very reliant on it here. Do you know? As I say, it's welcoming people, and being part of the service industry is second nature to us.
Thanks, Nuala. And just from your own, from the perspective of Elwee Caves, can you just, speaking as a business that hopefully we're going to see reopening in the next number of weeks, can you say, on the one hand, which of the supports have been most valuable to your business? And then secondly, from a working capital perspective, what are going to be the challenges for you reopening, having been, you know, effectively shut down for so long?
Absolutely. Well, I hands down for me, it's been the EWSS, because it has allowed us to bring back our core staff, you know. And I suppose I talk of COVID silver lining. Some people mightn't agree with that juxtaposition of phrases, but you know, it gave us an opportunity to look at all our work systems, you know, be it time and attendance, be it, you know, accountancy measures, all that sort of thing. And we've become leaner. There is absolutely no doubt, you know, that we've had the time, you know, whereas we've been busy being busy, you know, and welcoming people all year round. We're open all year round. This, you know, and the fact that we were deemed a viable business, and we were allowed to use the EWSS, it has brought back, you know, I have 11 full-time staff on now, some of them working from home and that sort of thing. But without that, it would be gates locked, doors locked, and hopefully open up a couple of days before we could welcome people on site again, yeah, but having said that, I'd love to relight the cave. I'd love to. These were all plans that were due to happen. Do you know what I mean? Prior to COVID. So I don't have money for that anymore. And our cash burn, I won't even go into the thousands per month that we have to spend just to stay afloat. So yeah, I would be, again. Just before COVID, I had signed up for the SCBI scheme, and I was looking at relighting the cave or rebrand, all that sort of thing. But that has got to be put has had to be put on hold, But the 5-year plan is now the 10-year plan. That's how I look at it, And we can still welcome people in the meantime, and they'll have a great time here in the Burn. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Nuala. I'm going to move very soon onto the questions. We're obviously getting a lot of questions now that are getting fed onto my screen now. But just in terms of the one we received post-registration, Minister, if I could ask you, and there's a lot of them that are in this sort of bracket around business restart. So specifically, if you have any guidance on when things like say trade events in the RDS, gyms and swimming pools, click and collect for our, we always call it the so-called non-essential retail, but the clothing, footwear and jewellery sectors. Would you be able to give us any sort of feedback on when you would expect those sectors to reopen?
Well, look, just to say, I suppose we're in a very different position this summer than we were last summer. And I expect, because of that, we're in that different position to be able to do more than what we were able to do last summer. And as Professor O'Neill has said, in terms of we have more research now, we have more information to enable us to do that in relation to good ventilation outdoors, all of what he has said. So, but in saying that, we still have to wait till we get to a critical stage of vaccinations. And that's what's going to determine the reopening over the coming 4 weeks to 8 weeks. And we don't want, for the sake of 2 weeks, to jeopardize everything that has been made. So next Friday, we will give a much clearer picture to everybody, and the Taoiseach will outline that to the nation. But what we do know now is what's opening next month in terms of golf clubs, outdoor events. We do know that from early May, click and collect, non-essential retail, beauticians, hairdressers, religious services, and then the anticipation is the end of May, beginning of June, we will have the hotels and our hospitality sector. That's where we're at the moment. That's the guidance that we can give at the moment. And I'd love to be able to share more, but I genuinely can't. But next Friday, based on the cabinet meeting next Thursday, getting the updated information from the various advisory groups, and I think that's what they need to be, advisory groups. The cabinet does need to take the decisions next week and does need to take on board the competing demands and the competing issues that needs to be addressed. And we do need to get our people back to work. Okay,
thanks, Minister. Professor Luke, one that's coming in for you now, as we were talking about antigen testing, but this is a specific query from an employer. Now, they haven't named the test, but they've said, we have antigen testing in place. We got negative tests on Friday afternoon and then positive tests on Saturday. How accurate are they? Could you comment in general, because it has been one of the critiques of antigen testing has been around accuracy, and comment on their administration and their accuracy, say, in the workplace?
Well, first of all, the more a screen than a test, Neil, that's important people to know. The PCR is the gold standard test, you see. So when it's a screen, there will be false positives and false negatives. Some of them are around 90, 95% accurate, if you want to use that word, which is still very good, by the way, because if we're capturing 9 out of 10 cases and they stay home, that's a great add-on, you remember, you see. Now, why you see a lack of performance, that's a tricky one. There are tests that are listed, and maybe even the HSEs. I'm not sure, there's listed them somewhere, could be the HSE side, but certainly the European Union has a list of validated tests that they say can be used, you know? So I would check that test against the list to make sure that probably is valid, but you might see, you know, yeah, as sometimes a positive, sometimes negative, you do at that level, but it's very low. It's unusual what happened there. I think you wouldn't expect to see an opposite result the day after, for example, you know?
Okay. And I appreciate there's an element of this that veers into the legislative and the operation for government. But from your point of view, say looking at the quarantine regime, and you were discussing early on the level of success of the public health measures in Israel. Why do you think that, say, that Israel in particular appeared on a mandatory quarantine list at the start? And what do you think NPHET should be looking at in terms of permitting travel and specifically travel that from where mandatory quarantine is not required afterwards? How do you think that should be mediated by public health?
That's another difficult one, Neil, to be honest. I wouldn't want to give a specific comment on it. I mean, clearly we've got to control our borders to some extent because the fear is the variants, as we know. That's why this quarantine business is so important, because we don't want to import a variant that might be more troublesome. So it starts with that concern, you see. Now, they're using case numbers per country. I think Israel has a certain level of cases. But remember, the case numbers will become less and less relevant, because if those cases don't translate into severity and disease and hospitalization, then it's like any infectious disease. We don't count the number of people having colds all the time, do we? You know, because that doesn't progress into severe disease. So if there's a high case number at the moment, they're using that as a kind of as one metric here, and that might change over time. Watch. The only way out of this will be some kind of certificate for travel, of course, and we all hopefully agree with that. The EU are about to issue these certificates in the middle of June, they reckon. And those certificates will allow people to travel between most EU countries, remember, without quarantine. Because the certificate means either you've had the vaccine, that's obviously one of the criteria, and very interestingly, if you have evidence of being infected. So in other words, we're not going to discriminate now against people who aren't infected, which is great, by the way. I think that's a reasonable thing. We now know if you've been infected, you will have of the order of 80 to 85% protection against reinfection. It's almost like having a vaccine if you've been infected already. Secondly, what's really good is if you've been infected and you take the vaccine, you have a massive immune response, you know? And the data, again, from Oxford, which I just was discussing about an hour ago, they showed us all this fantastic data. One shot of AstraZeneca, if you've been infected, was giving 90-95% efficacy, just like a single shot of Pfizer, you know? So in other words, it's sensible then to say, look, if you've been infected, if you've been vaccinated, you should be able to travel without having to go into quarantine. Now, we're not there yet, remember. The last little piece of new information, literally this morning, there's better evidence now the vaccines will protect to some extent against the variants, which is good. That was an unknown. It's still not fully known. Our fear was that the variant would break through the vaccine and infect you again, you know. But now in the US, there's a good study, and then the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has reported 2 days ago that works against the South African variants reasonably well, especially against severe disease, which is good. So that gets rid of the fear of allowing vaccinated people to travel, because the fear would be they're carrying in a variant with them, you know. But if the vaccines are giving protection against variants, that's a really good thing. But I would emphasize, Neil, this is still a work in progress. Every day, this is changing, and it may go backwards. So as we all would remember, it's kind of one step forward, 2 steps back some days, you know. So it's something that we're keeping a very close eye on.
So, Minister, it's you're winning in the voting at the moment in terms of questions. So I'm going to come back to you. First of all, a very either optimistic or leading question from Mark Paul about extra bank holidays in the shoulder season this year in September and October to assist domestic tourism. I see Nuala is giving that a big thumbs up. I know there has been discussion before, to be absolutely fair. There has been there has been lots of talk previously about a Q4 bank holiday, because we do have an October bank holiday, but one leading up to Christmas. Is that something that has been discussed in any way, Minister?
I don't know how serious has been discussed. I do know it has been bandied about, and I do know that the suggestion has been made. And certainly, you know, I'll reiterate it. It has come in as a suggestion from this forum to the powers that be. But People have asked, and I'm looking at some of the questions that are going in there as well, known as Neil, is in terms of how are we going to stimulate the economy, because the domestic economy is going to need stimulation. And I think the key to that is going to be the summer economic recovery plan that's going to be announced in May of this year. And by all means, it is being worked on now. If you do have suggestions, feed it into me, and I'd be happy to feed it back in. But I think what from my perspective, looking on, is the amount of money that people have saved in this country over the last 12 months. I think between July and September last year alone, 2.3 billion euro in personal savings. But I personally believe there is going to be a pent-up demand there. I know from even anecdotal evidence, speaking to friends, speaking to family, speaking to wider communities, people just cannot wait for the opportunity to get out, to mix, to socialize, to visit the hospitality sector. And I'm looking forward to a situation when we can do that in a safe environment, in a safe manner. People really need it. It's going to be good for the economy, but equally importantly, it's going to be good for people's mental health.
Okay, thanks for that, Minister. There is a question. We did have a lot of this coming in with the bookings, and now I see Siobhan asking the same question live on the credit guarantee scheme. And as you know, Minister, we've been quite critical of the drawdown rate on it. It's struggling to hit 10% of the 2 billion committed. Yet at the same time, the future growth loan scheme is going very well and has it's last time I checked, I think it was around 80% of committed funds under the future growth loan scheme had been drawn down. The two key factors do appear to be the coupon and the duration. And the future growth is longer term debt than credit guarantee scheme. So specifically, would you be willing to extend the repayment period under the credit guarantee scheme, or reduce the cost of funds involved with it?
Well, firstly to say, when it was originally announced last, I think it was around June or July of last year, 2 billion time deadline to be implemented, I think October of last year. That has been extended to the end of this year. So to my mind, that's a clear indication that it's not working as it was originally envisaged. It has been extended out to a wider participation in terms of financial institutions. Originally, it was only the two main pillar banks. It's now the 3 banks, 4 non-banks, 19 credit unions. So in terms of people's accessibility to it, it's much wider. But I do think something needs to be done in relation to the criteria. I've spoken about it with the Taoiseach. It is a matter for the Department of Finance, but we are feeding into the process at the moment that we do need to change the criteria, because it is not working as it was envisaged. As I said, 2 billion was announced for this scheme in July of last year. The deadline was, I think, the 31st of October. And the reason that deadline was put in place, because we felt it could be oversubscribed. We're 12 months on and we have a 10% drawdown. So it's not working. It does need to be reviewed. And there is, I suppose, preliminary work on that, ongoing in the department.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Luca, I'll come back to you as we have a couple of questions relating to children. Again, I'm conscious that I don't want to ask you a question that's, neffety, but will under 16s need a negative test to travel, and will children need to be vaccinated? So from where do you think, or do you think that there's a cutoff age in terms of vaccination?
It's a really important question, Neil, obviously enough. Now, remember, this is a very benign disease in children. It's literally like catching a cold at worst for children. Now, there are rare cases, and we're very sympathetic, of course, when it does get severe. But it's a minor disease in the under 18s. That would mean we may not need to vaccinate them. If we vaccinate everybody else who are over 18, and especially all the vulnerable groups, there may not be a need to vaccinate them. You see, that's one argument. The counter argument is, to get this dreaded herd immunity phrase, we have to vaccinate them. And that means getting rid of the virus really completely, And some people are going to argue one way or the other. it's going to be a debate as to whether we vaccinate children. Now, we want children to travel, don't we? If you want to bring them on holidays with you, to wherever it might be. So,
maybe not.
Well, I don't know. It could be an excuse to leave them at home, but they won't like that. I'm sure our 17, 18-year-olds want to go interrailing. So I don't know. Sadly, I don't know. They may go for over 16s. That might be one possibility here. If a child has been infected strangely, that might count, and you won't need to be vaccinated. But I understand people's anxieties, and remember, we won't say for definite until the trials are done. Remember, the first thing with vaccines is safety first by a country mile. Always remember. And now Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna are running trials in children, and we'll see what they look like. If there's any hint of any safety issue, forget vaccinating children, 100%, So it's a bit of a work in progress, I guess, is the only way I can answer.
Okay. Thanks, Luke. Minister, a couple more that are, there's an extent to which you have answered this, but in terms of reopening, but on the personal services, and obviously we have a lot of people involved in grooming, massage therapy services, and of course this hits the hospitality sector as well, and the wellness and what happens in hotels. But when we see the phrase staggered reopening of personal services, has the government anything in mind about how long that staggering is once the reopening commences next month?
To answer honestly, I don't know. I think there was initial talks in relation to enabling people who were doubly vaccinated access services quicker than maybe people who weren't because of their protections. I don't know whether that really floated quite well, to be frank. But it is something that how we're going to open up is under discussions at the moment between Department of Health, Department of Taoiseach, and this department, and we are going to give guidance next Friday. So I don't want to mislead anybody, conscious of the fact that people are looking for certainty, are looking for a clear direction. But what I would say is next Friday we will be able to give that.
Okay. You did mention, Minister, when you kicked off there on the summary rescue process, and you have set an ambitious timeline to get this over the line by summer recess. I appreciate that we don't have heads of bill, but and declared interest question there from Barry Lyons, who's our legal advisor on the summary rescue. But would you be able to comment on the exclusion of any creditors from that process, and specifically the revenue, because we know the revenue did want to be excluded from that?
Well, what will I say? Just the politically correct. There's ongoing engagement with revenue, and I'm sympathetic to what Barry is saying, and I think Barry will be happy with what we come present before Cabinet in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
But it is ultimately a Cabinet decision, and while I'm the Minister responsible and I will bring it to Cabinet, I do need Cabinet decision on what I'm proposing. So it would be inappropriate to give certainty without getting that. But I do believe Barry and Ismay will be. I think you will be happy with the shape of the proposals that we're bringing forward. Okay.
There's a question from Michael, and he does mention PCR, and I'm not sure about context. Perhaps he means PCR and antigen, or just antigen. But if I pose the question to you, Minister, because and again, not referring to any specific workplace outbreaks, but from my own personal point of view, visiting my mother in a nursing home recently, I was antigen tested at the door before I was admitted. And the question from an employer is whether the state is going to help or assist, say, hospitality businesses to test tourists in some ways to mitigate risk. Because while of course we're lobbying to open business as quickly as possible, we also do want to do that in a safe way. So could you comment on whether workplace or service place or hospitality place testing could be subsidized in any way?
I think government has introduced a very comprehensive suite of measures in terms of the supports that I outlined at the beginning. We are committed to, as I say, no fall off the end of the cliff at the end of June, and we're committed in the summer economic plan to look at what measures and what supports will be extended or what new measures may be introduced. And I think Professor Luke O'Neill, and who was a very clear supporter of this, and thankfully, and I was disappointed at the length of time it took for the Ferguson report to be produced and published. It has been adopted, and I think now people and businesses are aware that while antigen test is not the answer, it can be part of a suite of measures that can be used. There was not publicizing or advocating on behalf of any particular company, but you'll be aware that a company who were on the approved list of providers came to Dublin, to the hotel beside us here in Buswells on Kildare Street, provided free antigen testings to members of the Oireachtas who wanted to participate in it. And it is just so simple, so easy, so efficient, so timely, that I think it's in business's own interest to maybe partner with some of these companies to help. And as I said again, it is just one suite or one measure in a suite of measures that would help to alleviate the fears of their customers. And we do have the Dr. Ferguson report to back it up now.
Okay. This is a slightly different question on SBCI, but could you comment on whether, excuse me, government, we've seen very bad news over the last number of weeks, of course, on banks and on the thinning of the banking environment with the withdrawal of Ulster and KBC. Does the government intend to question banks on their criteria, their award criteria for funding under SBCI? We understand that a lot of banks are a lot of businesses are getting their approval, which of course is not a loan approval from SBCI, but when they go into the banks, the approval rates are running at about 29%, according to our own figures. Is that something the government will address with our banks minister?
We did set up the Credit Review Office, and that is an office that is there to review a commercial decision taken by the banks. You are right, at figures as of early April, loan applications to the value of 399 million were submitted, but drawdown was only at 246 million. So there is a gap there. We did extend the criteria out to 4 non-banks. We did extend the criteria out to 19 credit unions, who, to my mind, are much more flexible and engaging with when it comes to lending and have significant reserves and the capacity to lend. So I would encourage anybody that if they have an SBCI approval, a letter of approval, if they go to their financial institution, if the financial institution, for whatever reason, refuses to take that decision to the Credit Review Office. I'm surprised when I recently looked into how few people are actually taking a refusal from the bank to the Credit Review Office. It was established there. It is there to help and assist people, and I think I would encourage more people to use it. The one thing I'm surprised is at some banks, and I said it to a particular business in my own constituency, I said, ask them to put it in writing, and we look at it then. i.e. we'll go to the Credit Review Office, and funny enough, when he asked to put it in writing, they were a little bit more receptive to them. So you have to challenge and push back on these as well.
Yes, and I would say the Credit Review Office has been very useful in giving us guidance on what to say to members. So I'll take the opportunity to say it to people who are listening now. When with a bank official on seeking debt finance, you're advised to say to them before that meeting ends, have I given you all the information you need to make a decision, just so that can't be put off later. Professor Luke, can I come back to you then on some, these are more workplace risk mitigations that people are asking about. And it hasn't been specified the workplace setting, so I'm afraid I can't give you any detail there, but what type of mask is best? And have you any comments on the use of ultraviolet for disinfection in the workplace?
Well, again, Neil, there's great science on this. There really is, honest to God, in the last, say, 3, 4, 5 months, really, and we've learned so much about this question of mitigation, which means de-risking, Ventilation has a primacy. Let's start with that, okay? You got to make sure there's good ventilation. Now, what does that mean? Having a window open, any kind of breeze at all, it doesn't have to be uncomfortable, any kind of feeling of the air moving, and then the virus spreads on aerosols, which are tiny little fluffy little liquids that come out, so any kind of breeze, any kind of ventilation is good. A bit of humidity is good as well, by the way. Like even having a few plants with water in them makes the air a bit moist. All these really make a difference, and then you move on to masks. Standard masks, you don't need to buy a fancy one, and remember the 2-layer cotton mask is okay, it's fine, and then a distancing, no crowds is the secret as well, so I wouldn't be spending a huge amount of money on surgical masks here. Regular 2-layer cotton masks are fine.
Okay, I'm conscious that we are really we promised we would wrap quite tightly, but if I could come back to you, Minister, just in terms of restarting grants, and the restart grants were slapped up. I think it's fair to say they were very popular among businesses. Is there going to be another announcement of restart grants with a particular eye to the reopening in May and June? And if so, what are the rules for those likely to be?
Again, I suppose I refer back to what we're going to announce mid-May in relation to the supports and how we're going to taper off what's there and what new measures we may introduce. And I think there will need to be something there to help businesses reopen. Maybe something that might be of interest to your members is the scheme that we introduced from my department a few weeks ago, the Small Business Aid Scheme for businesses who were ineligible to apply for CRIS. That closed for the first quarter, I think Wednesday or Thursday this week, certainly one day this week. It wasn't oversubscribed, so we do hope to be in a position to use some of the money that to assist non-rateable businesses. So businesses who have fallen foul of all schemes to date, because maybe they're operating from the shed at the back of their house, maybe they're operating from a van, maybe they're operating from, for whatever reasons they've fallen foul, but they have had fixed overheads the same as other business, albeit at a lesser amount. So we hope to be in a position to announce a new scheme for those businesses in the next 2 weeks, in advance of the summer announcement. And then, as I say, second, third week of May to have a comprehensive statement on the National Economic Recovery Plan, which will give certainty for the end of June, how those schemes that are in existence currently, how they will be tapered off, and if there are any new schemes to be introduced to help businesses restart.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Minister. And we've just put up the link to the Small Business Assistance Scheme for COVID there in the chat room for anyone who wants to see it. If I just do one wrap-up question for you, Minister, because, and this is more a question about this sort of general return to work in an office environment. Because obviously so many of us have now become used to working from home and have to some extent set up that way, but that has been on a sort of a force majeure basis. But at the point where people are either voluntarily choosing to work at home or their employer requires them to work from home, because we know in many cases that offices have actually been vacated, the Health and Safety Authority will be taking obviously a different view on those people who businesses require to work from home. So do you think over the next number of months, and I appreciate that this is part of the reopening plan, but in the same way as we were dealing with 5 lockdown steps before, is it likely that there will be, that as part of that stepped lockdown or reopen process, that there would be general commentary on when people could return to an office type environment?
Look at, I suppose, an acknowledgement that there are certain people that can't work from home and they will continue to travel, but there are a lot of people who can work from home, and the clear public health advice at the moment is for those people to stay at home because it's reducing mobility and it's helping in the fight against the virus. That is having an impact on particularly hospitality sector in large urban areas. You know, you're a neighbour of mine here in the department, Neil. It's a very different place than normal Kildare Street and Molesworth Street and all these areas, because people are working from home. And I honestly think even when this virus is gone and when we get back to an element of normality, we're going to see a very different working environment. And we're going to see a situation where people will be opting and looking to have an option to work from home. There will be hybrid models of people who will work a couple of days a week in the office, a few days at home. And my engagement, and I engaged quite recently with a very large multinational who's located here in Ireland. They've been in excess of 2,000 people located across a number of locations. And they're already planning in terms of a hybrid model, people working from home. That work is ongoing in the department here in terms of remote working, the option to disconnect from work, and that they are, I suppose, proposals that are under consideration. Some are out for public consultation, but we are looking, in my mind, at a very different working environment when we come out the other side of this.
Okay, thanks, Minister. We had promised everyone we'd be short, sweet, and to the point. So it's 1:34, and we're going to leave it there. We will shortly have the recording up on our website for those who want to access it. I'd like to thank all our delegates who signed into this today, but most of all, I'd like to thank Minister of State Robert Troy, Professor Luke O'Neill for that great information on vaccines and epidemiology, and to our own Nuala Mulqueeny. And Nuala, hopefully you can be back in business and trading, and we look forward to seeing you down in Ailwee Caves at some stage during the summer. So many thanks to all of you, and best of luck, and thank you for your work and attendance today.
Great. Thanks very much, Neil.
Thank you.
Yeah, all the best. Thanks, Minister. See you, Nuala. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye all, Slán.